You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We are kicking it right off today with our special guest, Congressman Phil Roe from the great state of Tennessee. So I'm going to bring the Congressman right in, and then we'll get into stuff later. But Congressman, welcome back to the program. It's a pleasure.
Hey, Brett, great talking to you. I hope things are not too cold where you are.
I can't stand this global warming. I mean, where else do you have global warming and all you do is shovel snow and freeze your tuchus off?
Well, exactly. We were at our Republican retreat last week over at Chesapeake, in Maryland, Salisbury, Maryland, and the Chesapeake Bay was frozen over. Apparently, that's pretty unusual.
It's been a cold one, but I went to school in Syracuse, and so I'm used to it. And it reminds me of the good old college days.
Well, you should be feeling pretty good with your basketball team right now.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought the Syracuse Duke game was, if it wasn't the best game I've seen in a decade, it could be a couple decades. It was an incredible game, and you really didn't know until the game ended what was going to happen. I thought it was incredible, and then it kind of made me feel like, oh boy, the Super Bowl is not going to be good, and I was correct.
Boy, John, we're not going to talk about the Super Bowl. With being a Tennessee boy and having Peyton Manning, we will not talk about the Super Bowl.
and that made me sad, because being a Giants fan, I love Eli, and I thought their father was an incredible quarterback as well. I think what a gifted family, and I wanted nothing more but to see him win another one. So maybe next year. Maybe next year,
and they're good people too. They're really good, decent people.
Without a doubt. Well, I know that's not, we didn't call to do a sports show, so why don't we have so many things to discuss today. I don't know where we should start, so why don't we do this? Because you are a doctor, and you are so wonderful to speak on these issues regarding Obamacare and health care. And, I'm going to refer to the CBO report, which I think is, one, damaging to the administration and to Obamacare, and two, pretty much backing up what we've been saying for a long time.
Brett, the thing that I don't understand, and for our listeners out there that don't know who I am, and probably most don't, I practiced medicine for 31 years, and in rural Appalachia, in Johnson City, Tennessee. We town of 65,000 people. We have a medical school there and a VA hospital there, so it's a referral area, a catchment area. So I'm very familiar with this. Spent 31 years, came to Washington, retired from my practice, and came up here to actually work on health care. And unfortunately, not one of the doctors in the Doctors Caucus, of which now I co-chair, there were 9 of us 5 years ago when I came, and not one of us was asked one thing about that health care bill. And I had gone through health care reform in Tennessee and spent almost 20 years with it, with the reform of Medicaid, so-called TennCare. And I wrote an op-ed piece 4 years ago, and I pulled it back out and reread it the other day, and it's exactly what I said was happening is happening. It's going to happen is actually happening. And if you had been out where I have been, out in the real world, you understand last year that these things were happening about jobs, for instance. And, of course, I think the biggest and Brad, I've heard you talk about it. I think one of the biggest problems we've got in this country is job formation, because it's creating all these other pressures on our social welfare systems. And if people had the opportunity for jobs, a lot of our problems would go away. In our community, where we have a hospital system there, Mountain States Health Alliance, that has, and not all in Johnson City, but their entire system has about 9,000 employees. So it's a sizable system. We've lost almost 1,000 jobs. Vanderbilt University in Nashville, near where I grew up, 1,000 jobs, and at Vanderbilt has actually cut the size of their medical school class and their MD PhD program. And the MD PhD program, they've cut those by 10%. And those are the programs that produce our future researchers and scientists that find the cures for things. And does anybody in the United States of America think that's a good thing when we don't produce as many doctors and researchers? It's a terrible thing. And someone asked me the other day, well, why did they do that? Well, they did it because their revenues are going down because of several things. One, the sequester. Two, Obamacare. and it is doing exactly what we thought. I am not at all shocked, and I will bet you in the future, if we don't make some alterations and changes, the CBO is just acknowledging, the Congressional Budget Office, who make these estimates, are just acknowledging the fact that businesses, when you force certain mandates on them, will respond in a certain way, and that's exactly what they've done.
Yes, and having fewer and possibly lower quality doctors will not only be dangerous, in my opinion, but it'll cost lives.
Well, and we're taking young people. Brett, I've spoke to a group of pre-med students and medical students back in my hometown about 2 weeks ago. And I really want to meet and talk to these young people who are going to be doctors and try to encourage them, because people ask me all the time, well, would you do it again? And for me, this is me, Phil Rowe speaking, but unequivocally I would. I had a wonderful career. I can't imagine doing anything that I would have enjoyed as much as I did of taking care of people in a small community like I did, where I got to watch the kids that I delivered grow up. I got to take care of people with no insurance. We took everybody who walked through the door. And that's the way I thought a doctor was supposed to do. And with all the manipulations that have gone on with payment systems and insurances and the federal government and checking the box, and if you don't check, if the doctor doesn't check everything off just right, then the stencil shirt guys come in and raid your office. I mean, it's ridiculous what's going on. And this disruption is not good for patients. Ultimately, I think of everything I think of, Brett, is what's good. Does this make this better for patients and less expensive for them to go to the doctor, and does it improve the quality of their care? And the answer to that is no. Now, are there going to be a few winners in this? Yes. And let me tell you about a man I talked to last night, spent 20 minutes on the phone. He lives in Door County, like in your front door, Wisconsin. Now, why am I talking to a guy from Wisconsin? Well, I was at a meeting downtown speaking to a group there, and one of the people there said, well, I've got this friend who's really upset about what's going on with Obamacare. So I said, well, I'll call him up. So I called him up last night and talked to him. And he said, Dr. Rowe, he said, I feel like I've been stabbed in the back. I said, well, Don, tell me about it. And Don said, I've been in business. I'm 62 years old. I've been in business with my wife. We built this bakery. Apparently they have a very successful bakery, and you can buy other things and goods in there. And during the winter when it's bad like this, he's down to about 3 employees. But when the weather breaks in the summer, when people go out on their vacation, he's up to about 12 to 15 employees. His own personal, he said, I've taken care of everything I've done myself my entire life. And he said, my insurance was $683 a month. I just found out now, it's going to run out. His insurance runs until July, I think he told me. It goes to $1,497 to $100, $1,500 a month, essentially. Almost
That's more than double.
Yeah, it's 120-something% increase. And he said, I'm so furious, but there's nothing I can do. And the fact that one other person benefits, well, what about Don? What about Don and his wife and family that are trying to run this small business? And I can repeat, I have found, Brett, at full disclosure, I did find one person in my district whose insurance premiums went down, and I told him, he's a friend of mine, I said, well, don't worry, because mine went up a lot more than that just to cover yours going down. And that's what's happened around the country. I just got off the phone with a doctor in Kansas. I got off the phone with a doctor in Bellevue, Washington, not 10 minutes ago. And both of them are telling me the same thing. The doctor in Wichita said doctors are not taking Medicaid now, and they're beginning to bail out of the Medicare system.
Well, 2 quick ones. I saw somebody, a friend of mine, post that he just went to a doctor, and he has one of these new plans, and he had a $100 copay. And he said that, my old copay, I forgot if he said it was $15 or $25. But so I think the out-of-pocket costs are going to be a lot. But let me put something in perspective here, because I saw another posting that and I'm not sure if this is 100% accurate, but if it is, that the average health care plan will now run approximately $16,000 a year.
That's probably right.
The median income, median family income is roughly about $52,000. So that means if you're $16,000 plus your out-of-pocket cost, you could be looking at maybe $20,000 a year. That's 40% of the median income. How are people supposed to, once you've put a roof over your head, if you can, pay for your food, pay for your clothing, have a car, other types of insurances, utilities, how are people going to possibly save, pay for their kids' education and all the other things we're supposed to have been doing. I mean, I think, we obviously had cost problems before Obamacare came about. But
they look pretty good now.
It's getting way worse. And on top of that, we have higher out-of-pocket costs. Quality of care is going to be reduced. The system overall is eventually going to be, much worse than it is today. And then we have all these additional taxes and everything else that we've been talking about as well.
Well, Brett, here's the part that again, I'm sort of in the weeds on all this because it's what I do. But I go out and visit the various hospital systems. And our local hospital system, which is over $1 billion a year system, it's a big system, and they told me recently that 40% of their uncollectible debt, the billings they cannot collect, are people with insurance, which means that these out of pockets that are going to astronomical levels, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a family, $12,000 a family. My son's is $12,000. He lives in Chicago. He and his wife. That's their total out of pocket. And so the people that can't, fortunately, he can pay, but other people who cannot pay, the hospital just writes that off. And so not only is Medicare paying them less, the private insurance that they used to count on to cover the difference in costs of the Medicaid patients they took care of and the Medicare patients that didn't pay the full dollar's worth of care that they get out of each dollar, now that's no longer happening. It's unbelievable. As I mentioned, I think, on your radio show before, in Southwest Virginia, just north of where I live, we've already had one hospital close, and it's just a start. There are going to be others, many others.
Yes. Well, we could talk about this all day, but unfortunately there are so many other issues. And I know we'll have another chance to pick this up, and there'll be certainly more for us to discuss on this issue. A couple other things that are going on, and I'm glad to see, because I was getting fearful, to be honest with you, the talk about passing an immigration bill. Now, the concern I have, the same as I had with Obamacare, is I don't trust this administration. And I certainly have issues with an administration that's not following the current laws that are in place, as Speaker Boehner pointed out today. And so I would love to see immigration pushed off until we have a new president, to be honest with you. And I feel like this, passing piecemeal bills in the meantime are going to do nothing to resolve the main issue, which is, one, border security, followed by, coming up with legitimate ways of dealing with this issue.
Brett, let me really take you inside baseball, okay?
Thank you.
I'll take you back a week from today. We are, as a matter of fact, about this time a week ago, we're in Salisbury, Maryland, at our GOP retreat, and the speaker opens this up, and I don't care what's been published or said. I was sitting in the room when this was said, so I know this is what was said. He said, here are some principles that we will talk about, and I have them in my briefcase, 5 or 6 principles on immigration. He said, this discussion this afternoon is an open discussion. We have not decided to do anything but one thing, and that is we're not going to bring up the Senate bill. So the big bill was passed, I guess, May or June of last year, is not going to be brought to the House floor, so you can forget that. And, Brett, when you started your comments to begin with, that was exactly the theme that we had, was we don't trust the administration to uphold the law. If you did, it would be fairly easy to go do, I think not easy, but we could do an immigration bill if you had trust. Now, a couple things that I didn't realize until I really got to studying this issue is that there are some things you could do in a piecemeal bill, and one is, I had always thought that, look, if we make sure that our southern border is secure, that we'll be fine. That's not true. 40% of the people who are in this nation illegally came here legally. They came on a student visa, they came on a tourist visa, they came on a whatever, and they just never went home. So we don't have any way to the in and out checks that they do at the border are not working. We're letting the folks come in, but then we have no way to find out and to be sure that they're actually leaving the country. So there are a couple things you could do short of, and I think short of a big immigration bill, which the House is not going to do. I don't know what the Speaker said. I didn't see his news conference today, but that was pretty much the theme, that we're not going to do some big, huge, comprehensive bill right now.
Now, that's interesting because, and you're absolutely correct, we have no system in place to track people who enter this country, even legally, and have expired visas or overstayed their visit. We don't know where they are. We can't track them down. This is the ironic part. They could listen in on our telephone calls. They could look at our emails and all the other stuff that's going on, because that's a whole other controversy. But they can't do this, which is, in my opinion, is as or equally important. So that's kind of ironic.
I would say a lot more important than knowing who you phoned today, or I was at an NSA briefing, and and they said, well, it's data mining. All we're doing is keeping the numbers. I took my cell phone out and I said, listen, I've got a $1 app on this thing that tells me whoever's number shows up tells me who it is. It cost me $1. So how hard is that to do? Of course you can find out who it is. And anyway, that's another subject. I'll get really wound up if I start talking about that.
It's amazing. Well, Congressman, I guess I was fortunate because I actually enjoyed it very much. But I watched the hearing today on C-SPAN on the IRS, I'll call it scandal. The IRS going after conservative and Tea Party organizations. And please, if you could do me this favor, if you see Jim Jordan or Congressman Gowdy or any of the others who were on that, I thought they did a great job. I thought the witnesses, including Jay Sekulow and I forget the other lawyer. I know she's been around for a long time. I can't think of her name. I thought it was a great hearing. I thought they really got into the heart of the matter. And I think what was really surprising, and I know this happens because it's so political, but the other party seemed to me to try to change the subject and almost attack those who were being attacked by the IRS instead of addressing the issue. But the Republicans on the committee didn't let them get away with it, and I thought it really was eye-opening for those who haven't seen a lot of this for the first time. It was tremendous, I thought.
Well, Brett, here's the takeaway from that hearing is that, look, the R's and D's can change. And what we should be worried about is that we don't want a Republican president doing the same thing either. We don't want any president, any administration doing that as an American citizen. And that's why the Democrats ought to be as worried about this as we are, is that why would you be looking at liberal groups differently than you would be looking? Everybody should get a fair look. It shouldn't be Democrat or Republican. And that's the takeaway from that hearing is that why are you protecting something you should be piling on exactly like Senator Baker did years ago during the Watergate hearings?
I was just going to say, the same thing happened with Nixon, and what happened to Nixon? I mean, and if you ask me, what's been going on for the last few years is far worse than anything that happened under that administration.
Well, and you look at, like I said, Senator Howard Baker, obviously a famous senator from Tennessee. He threw away his Republican cloak and became an American and did the right thing. He went after his own president and took him down, and that's exactly what should have happened. And people out on that should not be protecting this administration. They should be getting to the bottom of it, and maybe they're totally not culpable. Who knows? But that's what facts will tell you. That's what an investigation tells you. Maybe there is no culpability there, but you would find out if you actually look. You shouldn't be defending something. And I will pass this along in the omnibus to make our listeners feel a little better, because I came back from the prayer breakfast and drove by the IRS building, and it did give me some pleasure to know that we cut their budget by $500 and something million this year.
Well, I have the real easy solution. If we just repeal the 16th Amendment and replace it with something that makes sense, we won't have these issues, and we won't have politicians, no offense, playing with our tax system to promote or not promote, certain agendas, and everybody would be treated the same, which is, I think, what both sides have been calling for.
I would beef that in a heartbeat, because I have got a blood pact with my accountant. If he ever goes away or whatever, I'm going to finish my business dealings right then. I don't even try to do my own taxes, and somehow I got through calculus in college. It's more complicated than calculus, I can tell you that.
Well, I know we're running short on time, so if we can, just one more question or one more quick focus. Looking at the Middle East, I think since we've last spoken, we've seen an incredible turnaround in Egypt by those people ignoring what our president's doing here and literally throwing the Muslim Brotherhood out. So I think that's progress there. But I think the situation in Iran and in Syria and a lot of the other areas are certainly worse today than they were last we spoke. And these are definitely issues of concern for that region and specifically for our national security.
Brett, this morning at the prayer breakfast, it's interesting you asked me that. I sat next to, and I won't mention his name because I would worry about his life. He's a Christian from Lebanon, and I said, what's actually going on in Syria? You're their next door neighbor. He said some of the people, the quotes rebels or whatever, are so bad, and I'm telling you, he had pictures on his cell phone that would make. I mean, I've seen a lot of gruesome stuff as a physician. This was unbelievably brutal and gruesome what I saw. And he said some of those people that are in there now are forcing the country back to Assad because they're worse than he is. And I mean, it is that bad over there in Syria right now. And I look at the pastor that's imprisoned in Iran, and we're negotiating with Iran. Please tell me why, when we talk to them about a nuclear weapon, then we say we get him. He walks first, and then we can talk. Otherwise, we just keep these sanctions cranked down on your head. And I don't know why we didn't do that. Our president didn't do that. He's viewed as weak in the Middle East, and you know what happens when people view you as weak? They take advantage of you.
I was briefed recently by a fellow who had spent 5 months up along the border and most of that time in and out of Syria, and he confirmed exactly what you said. And what's shocking to me is we see reports of Assad literally razing neighborhoods in response to the revolt, and he's already used chemical weapons. We know everything else he's done all these years. It's kind of like you're trying to pick of which evil you're going to support, and in the meantime, you have all of these people who are refugees in other countries and people just caught in the middle of this, and it's a human tragedy.
It's so sad. I mean, this man, he said that there would be people beheaded by these rebels that didn't have a beard, or a woman would be killed just because she was a woman, didn't have a veil or whatever. I mean, it's unbelievably brutal, and I can't. When I saw these pictures, I mean, it was unbelievable stuff. And he said this is going on right now where he lives, and you're right. There are 1.8 million refugees in a little country of Lebanon that has 4 million people in the whole country. And so how do they support that? The people live in squalor. He said there are all kinds of people revert to crime when they don't have any food, and it's really an awful situation.
Well, I could say this to end our conversation. Thank God we live where we do.
Oh, my goodness. Every day I do, Brett. We live in the greatest place on the earth, and we got to make sure that we keep it that way, too.
Okay. Well, Congressman, I know you're busy, and I know you're doing a lot, so where could our listeners go to find out more about you and follow things that you're working on?
They can do that on www.roe, that's ROE, .house.gov.
Excellent. Well, Congressman Phil Roe, it's been great to speak with you, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Brett. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Well, folks, that was, again, Congressman Phil Roe. He's tremendous. In my mind, there are only a handful of, I call them A-plus congressmen, and he is certainly one of them. And the fact that he spent so much time as a doctor helping people and all the things that he has done, just awesome. And I always say, if we only had, 100 or 200 of Dr. Roes and all the other good guys, this country would be doing some really incredible things. And so great as always.